Chris Stewart is a multiple New York Times best-selling author. He is one of the best writers out there. He's a national award-winning author, also a world record-setting Air Force pilot, and the former owner and CEO of a small business. And he's a friend of mine. He is the congressman from Utah's 2nd Congressional District. Chris Stewart, welcome to the program.
Hey, Glenn, the nicest thing you just said was that I was a friend of yours. That's great. Thank
I know,
you.
and I expect that check to clear. Now, listen, here's the thing I wanted to talk to you about, because you are on the intelligence and you also are on the permanent select committee, and you have military background. What the heck happened this week? How close were we to a war with Russia?
Okay, so like often when we speak, Glenn, I have to be careful in what I say to you, and I want to speak in the realm of information that's publicly available, and that more than that, though, it just passes a common sense test, and that anyone with average intelligence would observe and be able to conclude, and that is, it was very, very dicey in the last 10 days or so, because one of the most intricate, complicated, and dangerous maneuvers any military force can endeavor to do is an orderly withdrawal. It's inherently dangerous in the sense that you're weakening your forces as you're trying to hold territory while the others leave the area of operations. The fact you have the Calamath River there, which obviously complicates that. And Vladimir Putin has, I think, we conclude there are certain thresholds that he will not allow to have happen. One of them is, any essential Russian strategic defeats. But one of them is also protect his forces from a humiliating defeat that would alter the outcome of the war. And that's what we were facing this week. And the good news is, ironically, Russia actually had a very well executed withdrawal that did not endanger massive numbers of their forces. And so Vladimir Putin wasn't faced with that choice, but it was very, very intense and a moment of uncertainty there that I think we had our eyes were on it very carefully.
I will tell you that when I saw the news, somebody came into a studio. I was in between shows, and somebody walked in and said, missile just landed in Poland. I was like, oh my gosh. And we hoped that it was a mistake, and it was a mistake on Ukrainian side. But Zelenskyy is still saying, we don't have the proof that it was us. What?
Yeah.
Is that even possible that he doesn't know?
No, Zelenskyy often says things that he has to say in order to achieve his goals. And you go back to the very beginning of the war, even before the war, he continued to deny that this was ever going to happen, despite the very clear evidence that it wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. And, he had to do that to keep on a brave face for his people, et cetera. And one of the things we're seeing now is him saying to his people and to his military, we're going to keep going. We're going to defeat every Russian. We're going to chase them out of every region in the Donetsk, eastern regions of Ukraine, and maybe even Crimea. So he will say things to rally his people and to rally his military forces. And I think this is an example of that. Going back to where I started, Glenn, where you apply a common sense test, which is becoming increasingly difficult, as you and I know, in the world around us, because we see things that just make no sense at all, and yet they turn out to be true. But Vladimir Putin does not want to go to war with NATO right now. He's in the middle of a catastrophe anyway, and to bring NATO into the war, especially on the western front around Kyiv, it would just take a catastrophe and times it by 100 for him, and not just militarily, but in the perception of the world. So when you saw those initial reports, one of the first things you ask yourself is, does it make sense? Why would Vladimir Putin do that? Well, and it turned out that he didn't. It turned out that it was almost certainly a Ukrainian missile, and it took us very little time to determine that it was, fired by Ukrainians. It was likely a Russian missile, but it was one that had been provided them previous to the war. And so that's why I think there was some confusion. But again, it just didn't make sense. And it turned out, again, not to be true, that Vladimir Putin was actually attacking a NATO country.
What do you think of Milley this week saying, we're just going to keep giving them money? Wow.
I don't think Milley's a member of Congress, so Milley doesn't get to make that decision, does he?
Are you going to? Do you think there's enough of you that are going to fight for an actual budget and appropriations that you could?
It depends on what you mean by number of us. Sufficient to stop it, I don't know yet. But there's a growing number of us, including those of us with military backgrounds, those of us who sit on Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, who will lead on these issues, who have increasing concerns about this. And I think, Glenn, you and I talked about an editorial I wrote several weeks ago that said, look, have we learned nothing from Iraq and Afghanistan? And if we have learned some of those lessons, we need to apply them here. And the very first thing we need to know is, are our goals and Zelensky's goals aligned? Because if he says, and he actually means, we are going to continue and press this war all the way into Crimea, the United States simply cannot support that goal without finding ourselves at war with Russia. An offensive operation in Crimea, Vladimir Putin would view that no differently than if we were to attack Moscow. And Zelensky certainly knows that. And so we have to first clarify this question. What are our goals in the Ukraine?
Yeah, we never do
if
that.
we can agree on those goals, then we will support the effort. And then the second thing you mentioned, Glenn, is where is this money going? Do we know that these weapons are actually going where they're supposed to be going? And by the way, why are we funding non-essential military operations like Ukrainian the retirement accounts for Ukrainian officials? I mean, that has simply got to stop as well. But we've got to identify where this money and how this money is being spent.
Let me switch topics. The Republicans have laid out the Biden investigation. They were very clear. This is not about Hunter Biden. This is about Joe Biden. The evidence seems to be overwhelming. You can impeach, but you won't you won't get the Congress to vote for impeachment in the Senate and convict him of that, most likely. What do you think is happening here? How is this going to be perceived? For the first time, Brock, what's his name? David Brock from Media Matters is leaving Media Matters, and he's going into a new shell company that is going to be coordinating the pushback on the Republicans. They are marshaling their forces like crazy, like only Democrats do. What do you think's coming?
They're marshaling their forces because they know that a catastrophe is coming for the administration, and that is the truth is finally going to be revealed. And it's going to be revealed in such a way that it can't be ignored. You know, Glenn, as effective as people like yourself are in announcing and stating what is obviously true, it doesn't have the same weight as when an official committee of Congress reaches certain conclusions. And it's harder for the media to ignore that. And this isn't just about some business dealings with big companies in Ukraine or in China. And of course, China is our primary focus. These are actual evidence of fraud. There's actual evidence of conspiracy. And with companies that are directly tied to the communist leadership and Communist Party in China. And we're finally going to have a chance to investigate and to subpoena and to understand these allegations. There's one thing I would caution, and then I actually have a conclusion I think might surprise you. We should caution ourselves in the sense we're not going to say we're going to impeach. What we should be saying at this point is we're going to investigate and we're going to find the truth. And then if that truth compels an impeachment, we should proceed with that.
I agree.
But I'll tell you this too, Glenn. I think the evidence of this is potentially so overwhelming that I don't think it's impossible that the Senate doesn't actually convict. I think it's possible the evidence of this is, again, so overwhelming that they may have no choice. Now, again, let's see. Let's do the investigation and let's see where we are. But I think this isn't an opening up a can of worms. This is something way more substantial for the administration than just an inconvenience for them.
Chris, I don't know if you know anything about this. I haven't looked into it. I haven't had time yet today. The Calamath River, they are getting rid of the 4 dams on the Calamath River for the salmon. This is not the same river. This is Washington, Oregon, California. This is not the 4 dams that they wanted to get rid of on the Snake River, right? I didn't know we were trying to get rid of 8 dams. I just know that we were trying to get rid of 4, apparently. Do you know anything about the Calamath River Dam?
Well, I mean, I know a little bit. I don't know that I know enough that I want to go on national radio and pretend to be smarter than I am. I will say this, though. What you indicated, I believe, is true, and also it shows the just insanity of the radical environmentists who are in the middle of a drought in the entire western United States. They think the solution is to drain the dams. They're trying to do the same thing here in Utah with the Lake Powell Dam. I mean, it just literally makes no sense. In the middle of a drought, in the middle time when water is precious anyway, in a region where wars are fought over water, as the old saying goes. Let's go drain dams because we know that's going to help. Again, it just simply makes no sense.
Real quick, the EPA has held up major oil refinery during the oil crisis. They're shutting everything down, and they're not letting us redesign or rebuild or anything, according to the EPA. Can Congress actually get anything done to actually relieve the American people of some of this nonsense by themselves?
Well, I think there's only one avenue to do that, and that's through the appropriations process, which you mentioned I sit on the House Intelligence Committee. I also sit on the Appropriations Committee. And there's good news and bad news there. We can compel some of these things by tying it to government funding. The bad news is that it's only a one-year solution. It's not a permanent solution because it's tied to language which only funds the government for that year, so that's as long as the language can apply. And the second thing is that you run the risk of having either the Senate or the president veto or reject that funding mechanism because of some of that language, and then you have to fight through the government shutdown. But we're going to have some victories on those things, Glenn. We will be able to insert language, whether it's with the EPA. Another example, defunding 87,000 IRS agents. I think that's one of the very first things we're going to take on, and we're going to do it through a defunding, again, through appropriations mechanism. And I challenge the president to shut down the government because he wants to justify having 87,000 IRS agents who are going to come after any small business owner. You don't need 87,000 agents to go after Jeff Bezos. That's clearly looking at middle-class Americans, middle-income Americans, and business owners. So I think we could have some success, and I think we will have some success on some of the EPA and the oil and gas industry. The absurdity of the president shutting down domestic oil production and then turning to the oil and gas producers and blaming them and talking about their greed over the price of gas. I mean, does he gaslight the American people to the extent that they just assumes every one of them are stupid? We know what's happened here, and I think we're going to be able to have a little bit of success on that. But
I hope
the challenge is you've got Schumer still running the Senate.
I know.
You've got to work our language through him.
All right. Chris, thank you for everything you do. Congressman Chris Stewart, and have a great Thanksgiving, sir. God bless.
Thank you, sir. You too.
You bet.